Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to CQ Advocacy's latest webinar, the One-Stop Advocacy Shop. And we know that this is a popular one because a lot of you have signed up and registered today for this event, so we're delighted to have you along. Just as a reminder, we are CQ Advocacy, and we have 5 different products, 2 platforms for all your digital advocacy, CQ Ignite, which is kind of our start-level platform, and CQ Engage, which is our more robust platform. We have CQ Knowledge, which is our congressional directory, CQ Advocate Acquisition, which is our digital advertising platform, and CQ Converge, which is our Hill Day or event app. And I'd also recommend that you check out CQ Connectivity because that's our free resource for blogs, white papers, and of course these webinars. So we really have a great panel today. We've got Joshua Habursky here again. Josh is the Assistant Vice President of Advocacy at the Independent Community Bankers of America, and of course he's the Chairman of the Grassroots Professional Network. So always happy to have Josh here. But we have a very special guest today in Libby Post. Libby Post is the Executive Director of the New York State Animal Protection Federation, and she has been since November 2013. She lobbies the New York State Legislature and the Executive Chamber on issues that impact the state's network of humane societies, SPCAs, nonprofit, and municipal animal shelters. And in 2017, she was successful in having $5 million added to the state budget to create the Companion Animal Capital Fund. And that was the first of its kind in the nation for capital projects for animal shelters. So Libby's going to tell us how she managed to do that as a one-stop advocacy shop up in New York. That funding, by the way, was renewed in 2018, and she's also, of course, been instrumental in getting other legislative initiatives passed. She's got a master's degree in political communications, and she teaches at the University at Albany's Rockefeller College for Public Affairs and Policy. So definitely stick around because I'm sure anyone would be interested in figuring out how you might be able to get $5 million from your state legislator. But first of all, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. So take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Ann. Good to be back for a second webinar this month in an interesting topic that certainly can apply to advocacy in the grassroots role of being a one-stop shop, or in some cases for a lot of the smaller association clients where you are just a one-stop shop in itself, and advocacy is a component of what you do. So for this, webinar, we're going to really talk a lot about stretching resources, dividing and conquering, being a Jack or Jill of all trades, leveraging tools, vendors, and consultants, networking to knowledge, and then, of course, very excited to hear what Libby has to say in terms of the New York State Animal Protection Federation and that advocacy case study. So in terms of stretching resources, I think that this is an essential part of, being a one-stop shop. You have to get the job done. You don't have a lot of bandwidth to get fancy tools or, hire outside folks to really put your program together. You have to really find innovative, free ways, and if you have a package or a suite of services and products, really maximizing what you have and using those to your advantage. You really can't get bogged down by some of the smaller projects, and I've noticed that in the association world where, you get many different products that come or projects that come across your desk, and it seems like the ones that should take the least amount of time end up taking the most amount of time. So that's really a mindset when recognizing that you're a one-stop shop, whether it's just your grassroots department or the overall association. You can't get bogged down by the details. You're going to have to look at the whole program and really chart your course at the beginning of the year, set your benchmarks, and execute them accordingly, recognizing that you, won't be able to do every little detail as much as some of the organizations that have 20, 30 staff that can do those things. You're also going to have to reuse and refresh content. So, being an advocacy one-stop shop, I work in grassroots and have done so for about 7 years now. And in most of the organizations, when I was at the Motorcyclist Association, I was a one-stop shop. And, we would refresh the content that we used in previous years for our membership. So, it would have a fresh look and a fresh scheme to it, but it wouldn't necessarily be 100% new text because that is time-consuming to do. For instance, an August recess guide, a lot of people, we talked in a previous webinar that is a core function of Grassroots and getting that program up and running. Refreshing that and reusing content with a new design and some updated, just basic text can be useful. Tools are essential. I think the, CQ products, as Ann mentioned, the federal and state legislative tracking, that's something that is essential for a one-stop shop because you're not going to be able to monitor the state register or the federal register on regulations. You're not going to be able to go to congress.gov and individually search for the issue areas each and every time. So that's something where you really, if you get the tool, you can stretch your resources there and stretch your own bandwidth because it will aggregate a lot of that information for you. You have to be highly organized and can't have a cluster of spreadsheets. I've seen that continually at the local and state level where a lot of the organizations are a cluster of spreadsheets. We have this person that has these connections, and over there we have this person with these connections. It needs to be centralized and organized in a way that's processable. Also knowing when to say no, and this is something that through even the Grassroots Professional Network, I've had to learn firsthand where, you can't do every single project. You're going to have your members coming to you and asking you for different things. And some of it, as a one-stop shop, you're going to have to say, here are resources where you can find it elsewhere, but you're not going to be able to go out of your way and take a whole day to put together a project for every single member. If you're, at a state association and you have, 90 members or even 900 members, giving them the individual attention is tough as a one-stop shop. And I know that, we've talked in previous webinars about some of the federated organizations and you have regional folks. There you can have some bandwidth and really provide a lot of that custom service. There are ways that you can kind of mask that a bit where you're providing a custom service and slight edits, but again, you're using reused and refreshed content. Which, is useful, that can be evergreen year to year. Dividing and conquering, so leveraging your coalitions. If you are a member of a coalition, they have considerable resources in some cases, and there's also large trade associations, corporations that are involved in these coalitions. Your membership and your organization a lot of times will provide the on-the-ground, localized, grassroots, authentic communication, and the larger coalition members are willing to share resources to really highlight that. I can give an example of a coalition where, it was on a renewable fuels issue, and the Motorcyclist Association was one of the foremost grassroots proponents of that coalition, and it was supported by some other folks in the energy industry because each was able to provide a resource towards one another, and the resources were able to be stretched. Leveraging your members, so getting your membership to take on some of these different roles and coming up with programs and structures where they can learn how to fish and then go out and fish on their own. And I think that, having ambassador programs and encouraging your membership to take an active role in advocacy within a confined structure is a useful tool where you maximize your results there. If you're fortunate and you're, speaking in the one-stop advocacy shop as part of a larger organization and you're just the only person in grassroots or advocacy, really leveraging the other departments in your organization. Your marketing and communications, your membership folks, they can provide some of those resources. They're not going to do advocacy roles, and it's not going to be 20% or 40% of their job description, but saying, hey, I know that you work in membership, you're in the Chicago field office, can you attend this advocacy event? Can you support this member that's meeting during an August recess visit in the district? Stuff like that, you really can divide and conquer. Leveraging past successful case studies, I think that Ann mentioned in the beginning, CQ Connectivity, there's a wealth of knowledge there and a wealth of organizations in the advocacy sphere that have done things successfly on shoestring budgets. We've done a past webinar, we were just talking before the start of this, on maximizing your budget. And those resources, along with some of the commentary that you'll have here today, you can find ways to replicate what's being done in the association space and the smaller nonprofit space. Really don't reinvent the wheel. If there's a program out there that you find to be useful, adapt it, change it, tailor it, make it useful to your own individual organization, and attribute it to success. Send a thank you note. Hey, I found your resources and your in-district program to be very useful. I used it as a benchmark and building block for my own program. By doing some of that outreach, you might get some more information and start a dialogue with an organization that's a successful case study and someone that is doing advocacy well. Jack and Jill of all trades, a fun expression here, you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone or your specialty. This is especially if you're a one-stop shop as an association. You're going to have to do many different things: membership, sponsorship, marketing, communications, government relations. If you're strictly in advocacy, you still are going to have to get out of your comfort zone and do some more of the things that are outside of your specialty area. Coming up with cross-functional projects, projects that have a benefit to multiple different departments or multiple function areas of the organization is always useful. If you are a one-stop advocacy shop and you have other departments in marketing and communications, come up with projects and programs where your department will benefit, but also show a ROI to the communications and marketing folks to get them to have some buy-in and really, again, stretch your resources so that you're able to be more effective than if you were doing it on your own. Be very cognizant of all the elements of the organization, of what's going into play. And I think that, looking at some of the case studies on connectivity and, ASAE and their publications have a lot of great stuff when it comes to the association world. Taking that information and, recognizing from the start when you're setting up an advocacy campaign, you really need to think about all of these different factors and how it's going to affect everyone in the organization. And to really sum this point all up, you have to be very versatile and have a variety of different projects going on at once that cover a variety of different areas. So leveraging tools, vendors, and consultants, your service providers have a lot of knowledge, and I think, CQ is a perfect example of that, and we've talked many times about connectivity, but also having that staff available for a quick call saying, hey, I don't really understand this, how can I do this better? I think the question when I'm working with any vendors in the technology side or even on the consulting side is, how can I improve, how can I make this better, and who has done this very well, so you can get some follow-up information of like-minded organizations. Use your existing vendors for advocacy and outside advocacy. So like, people that are in the membership sphere and the marketing and communication sphere, there's certainly themes and lessons to be learned on email open rates and content marketing that can be used for advocacy purposes. So, utilize those. If your communications and marketing department has an outside vendor that they use, ask if you can have a quick call or a coffee with them to pick their brain on some of these different things. Again, stretching the resources as a one-stop shop. If you are fortunate to have some budget capacity, use your consultants for the heavy lifts. Again, the projects that are very content deep, if you're doing a comprehensive how to communicate with government guide, that might not be something as a one-stop shop that you want to take in by yourself. That might be something where, hey, there's a content writer, there's a freelancer that you can bring on board and really put that together. And then, again, consult with your technology folks to make sure it works and everything's synced there. Product demos and case studies, and I think that, it's funny, I hear from a lot of people like, hey, I get these cold calls, I get these vendors reaching out, this is problematic, it's annoying. I don't see that at all. I think that folks really should take these as opportunities to learn on what's out there. So, from my standpoint in running in any grassroots program and any of the organizations that I've been at, I've utilized these product demos as ways to come up with ideas and say, is this solution right for me? Can I plug this in and, maybe utilize a tool from one or many organizations and put them together? But you'll learn about a lot of different case studies in the product demos. And also it's good to see what's new and what's on the market, what's out there. And so like I will routinely meet at, the end of the year or the beginning of the year, and then also over the course of the summer when it's slower with most of the foremost vendors that are on the market. And I think that getting those insights, whether you go with a product or not, can be useful in the long run. And again, just a great plug for CQ Connectivity and the free resources that they offer there, from webinars like this, but also some of the guidebooks that you can download, and then blog posts for quick reads. Networking of knowledge, again, there are great ideas that are out there. Lean on your peers for ideas and insights. It's no surprise that there are some folks in the industry that have received awards and recognition, and I will, when I'm getting ready to launch a large-scale campaign or something that's really important to our organization, I will go out and reach out to the Joe Francos of the world that are at Leading Edge, or the Matthew Wrights at Children's Hospital Association, and see what they have to say, because chances are they've encountered something like that. So really your peers can be useful. Again, if you're not able to get an outside consultant, it's pretty cheap to get a cup of coffee with them and pick their brain. Seek out similar organizations that are a successful one-stop shop. So if you know an organization doesn't have a ton of budget, it's a one-person grassroots entity or a one-person association, come together and again, take them to lunch, see what they're doing, what works for them, and how you can plug and play some of the resources and tools that they're using. Free can be all that you need in some cases. I've seen this when first starting the Grassroots Professional Network. We didn't have graphic designers, we didn't have content writers, we didn't have paid staff. It was literally go on Canva and create a graphic, use free Eventbrite tools, and piecemeal those things together. As we've grown, we've become more sophisticated and roughed out some of the edges there, but a lot of those free resources, even in organizations that have the budget capacity to use them, it's still useful in some cases to use the free tools. So knowing what your full spectrum of tool sets, free and paid, is incredibly beneficial to know. Set realistic benchmarks. If you're the Chamber of Commerce, your goals are going to be a lot different than the local association, and your capacity and your bandwidth there. So, I think networking to knowledge and finding those people that are like-minded will pay dividends in the long run. I'm going to switch it back over to Ann.
Okay, great. Thank you, Josh. All good tips as usual. We're going to go over to Libby in a minute. So, Libby, if you're listening, which I hope you are, take your phone off mute because we'll be with you in 1 second. But just as a reminder to everyone, we will send out the recording to this webinar afterwards. And if you've got some questions for Josh and for Libby, please start getting them together and you can put them in the Q&A box on your screen. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Libby Post.
Thank you, Ann, and thanks everybody for being here today. Just to give you a little overview, I own a firm called Communication Services, and the Fed, the New York State Animal Protection Federation, is one of my clients. And my business is pretty much a one-stop, one-person shop, and I work with freelancers for, different things like graphic design, web design, that sort of stuff. And I do all the writing and all the strategy and all the politics around my clients. And so the Fed came to me in 2013, and I was the former president of the Mohawk Hudson Humane Society. So I did have some experience in the animal sheltering world. And Mohawk Hudson is my local shelter in Albany, New York. And they asked me to take on running the Fed, and I started in November of 2013. And that first year was incredibly part-time because they didn't have the money to really pay for anything. And so one of the tips I will give you is get paid for what you're doing. And now they pay. There's a lot more of a more larger retainer, I should say. And so during the legislative session, I'm working pretty much full time, and I run the show. I run it I do everything. I do the marketing, I do the membership, I do the politics. I pay for a lobbyist out of what they pay me. I pay for a lobbyist because I can't be at the legislature every single day just waiting for things to happen, which is what you do. And so I have somebody who is there every day waiting, and then I'm there for meetings. And when I need to be, I spent all day Tuesday there because, or Tuesday or Wednesday, because it was the end of session and we needed to make sure our bills got passed, and thankfully they did. And I have a board, a 15-member board, and we have members. We have over 40 member organizations from across the state. And they come to Albany once a year for our Advocacy Day. And we do that Advocacy Day strategically in March, at the beginning of March, because the budget needs to be done by April 1st. And so if we bring our people in, shelter executives, they know their local assemblymen and senators, and they do lobby visits, and then we follow up on the ground as well. So we can go to the next slide. So I had this lovely idea. I do a lot of work with libraries across the country. I get good people like you to raise your taxes to support their local libraries. And in New York, we have a state library construction fund. And I thought, well, why can't we do this for animal shelters? And I have to tell you, everyone thought I was nuts that I would try to get this thing done. And they just thought it was impossible to do. Money is so tight. Shelters aren't on the top of anybody's agenda, all these kinds of excuses. And I was like, no, let's try and do this. And it's capital money, so it's bonded money, and it's not money that comes out of anybody's operating budget. It's bonded on a yearly basis. The state floats lots of bonds for different kinds of capital projects. And so I promoted this idea of $5 million, the Companion Animal Capital Fund, for capital projects, and we were successful. Let's go to the next slide so we can talk about it a little bit more. But we've been very successful in this, and what we did was this. I have a marketing and communications background, so we branded the initiative for visual identification across all the platforms. We had it both vertically and horizontally. As you can see, our logos here and the Companion Animal Capital Fund. and we used that branding when everything we did with CQ Engage or Facebook or our website or the emails that got sent out. Everything was branded specifically to the Companion Animal Capital Fund so that visually people would get it. You know, when you see, it takes at least 7 times for something to sink in, and, you know, when you see what I call the AT&T Death Star, you know that that's AT&T. When you see, you know, Coca-Cola, you know it's them, IBM, all the rest of it. So it's about us branding the initiative, and it's a very important thing to do when you're doing these kinds of things, to brand the initiative, because the visuals are very important, so people get that visual cue and they'll recognize, oh, this is that program, and I should pay attention to it. And so we use it across all the platforms. So next slide, please. So we did that, but then there's also about getting the right people in each house. And the first year I tried to do this, I did not have the right people, and it didn't go anywhere. And so, you know, it's a little funny, but I sort of fired the legislator that I had championing this in the Assembly, and spoke with Assemblywoman Deborah Glick, who I've known for a very, very long time, and she had come to me originally to want to do this, and then we couldn't do it, and so the next year we went back to Deborah. She's a Democrat from Manhattan in New York. The Assembly is controlled by the Democrats. And then State Senator Phil Boyle, who does a lot of animal bills. He's a Republican from Suffolk County and in New York right now for the moment, and for the last 50 years or so, the Senate has been controlled by the Republicans. So you need to get the right person in each house. Deborah Glick is a longtime Assemblywoman. She's been in for, I think, 27 years. And when we went to talk to people about this, you know, going to different offices and talking about it, when we said Deborah was behind it, they were like, oh, yeah, okay, this is going to happen. So our deadline was April 1st, because that's when the budget is passed. And we began our CQ Engage campaign in February of 2017. So, okay, so we did 5 engagements. The first one was called Your Shelter, Your Call, and we targeted the shelter executives, the people who run the shelters, to reach out to their legislators to sign on to budget letters to the leaders in each house. That's how a budget item like this gets done in New York State, and I think it's probably similar in other states as well, that letters get sent to the leaders in each house, either the Speaker in the Assembly or the Majority Leader in the Senate, with lots of different signatories on it saying, please put, this is one of our budget priorities, please put this in our house's budget bill. Okay, and so I had my local folks reach out to their local assemblymen and state senators, and we got a number of people to sign on to the letter. And then I did an action alert to the advocacy list to get folks to email Senate leadership. We knew we were good in the Assembly, and we really needed to push the Senate leadership, the Majority Leader, to make sure that when he got this letter, he would see it as being important. And I can tell you this, you know, do they read every single email? No, they don't. It's a counting game. So the more emails you can get sent in, the more they count, the more they see that there are people behind it. Then we did a 95% there action alert to get the list to call their legislators. And I have found that my list responds to asking them to email and not so much calls. The executives, the shelter people will call, but the advocates that are on our list, they rather just send emails. So I really just focused on that. Once I saw that that was the case, I knew, you know, we could just generate these emails. So next slide. So then we did a 95% there email to the governor, because in New York, okay, so it would be in the Assembly budget bills, it would be in the Senate budget bills, but then they all have to come together with the governor's people and have one final budget bill. And the governor's office needed to know that there were people in the community, people across New York State, who wanted this in the budget. And we had a lot of people respond to that and email the governor. So we were able to impact all 3 branches of government with this. And then we did a Stand Up With Your Animal Shelter email to get folks to come to Advocacy Day, which I said before was in early March, before the budget was passed, so that we had our shelter folks, but also some other folks from the community who like animal shelters, and they came and they lobbied, and you know, it's just one more tool in the box of getting people in to lobby. There are times where you'll find this probably in many states, and New York is one of the larger states with a larger budget and a larger legislature, where, you know, you go in on a Tuesday and you can't get in an elevator because there are so many advocates from all different kinds of organizations, and March is a very busy time because of the budget. But we got our people there, and we made appointments for them, and you know, the shelter execs who had already knew their legislators were able to talk to them and deliver the message. So then we used, for every time I did one of these, for the most part, I used a Facebook boost to couple with the emails and the engagements. And so I, you know, took the engagement and boosted it on our Facebook page, the Federation's Facebook page. And we boosted it to a specific audience, and it was to the people who liked our page and their friends. Because the people who like our page like dogs and cats. They like companion animals. And usually people who like companion animals, their friends also like companion animals. And so that's the universe that we've always targeted with our Facebook boost, and it's been very, very effective for us. And our CQ advocacy list, I think, is over 4,000 now, and our Facebook likes are close to 2,000. And so, you know, we've really seen both sides of this grow, and we've been able to use it very effectively over the course of the last few years to get our bills passed. So we can go to the next slide. So this is an example of the boosts. The first, I find these cute photos. But the first three at the top were all about, you know, we're 95% there, take a moment and email Governor Cuomo. We did it. It's in the budget. Send a thank you email to the governor and your state legislators. You know, once they do something, you always want to thank them. And you can see the first boost reached over 17,000 people. The second one reached over 14,000 people. And in addition to the boost, people shared it. So that also helped with the organic reach. And then when the governor, when they finally announced the RFP for this, the request for proposals, the governor put out a big announcement like it was his idea, which is fine. It's fine. He can take all the credit in the world as long as it's in there. The governor announces first in the nation state capital fund for critical improvements to animal shelters, and he did a video that went with it. And so that got a lot of play as well. And then once this was announced, okay, and the RFPs went out, we had 29 shelters applying for over almost $14 million. In the long run, 14 shelters got just under $5 million, and they got announced at the end of February. And if you can see the date on the first boost or the first Facebook post on the bottom where it says Senator Seward secured $500,000 for Susquehanna SPCA, he was there the next day to take credit for this. They love this stuff, and I know they love this stuff, and so that's why we do this. We give them the opportunity, and I was very clear with Ag and Markets that the RFP had to come out and the awards had to be made so that the legislators could use it in the 2018 election cycle, and they understood exactly what I was saying, and we made it happen. So Senator Seward is up for re-election, and, you know, he can use this in saying that he helped secure $500,000 for Susquehanna, and Susquehanna is going to build a new shelter. The Companion Animal Capital Fund, you know, it doesn't pay for everything. The highest award is $500,000, and that's not going to pay for an entire shelter, but it can pay for HVAC, it can pay for medical equipment, it can pay for kennels, it can pay for, you know, a piece of land. So, and then the next boost was Deborah Glick and I at at the Cornell conference. Cornell has a shelter vet conference every summer, and we gave Deborah an award for her work on getting this the money in the budget, and then we were able to give Phil Boyle his award this past March when we did our Advocacy Day, and he was very happy about that too. So, so we can go to the next slide. And so, you know, we've had incredible success using these tools, and I've been very happy with how it's all worked out for us, and our ability to reach our folks, but also the ability when I have a question, when I have a problem where something's not working right, I feel like I can call my rep and he'll get back to me right away, which is a wonderful thing, even if he's home, and help me through an issue. So this has been a wonderful collaborative relationship between the Fed and CQ Engage, and I have used CQ Ignite for other smaller public affairs campaigns I've done for other clients as well.
Great. Thank you, Libby. I mean, so much went right with this campaign, and you did so many things right, of course, but, you know, you and I have talked before, and one thing that really struck me was how you kind of separated your grassroots from your grass tops when you started messaging them. And I know in your case, your grass tops were the leaders at your animal shelters and your board, and then your grassroots being that bigger kind of Facebook audience. But I think it was particularly interesting how you messaged them in such a way that would speak to them. You know, with that your shelter, your call obviously was going to have a bigger impact on folks who would directly benefit from this capital fund versus the people who just love animals, right?
Right, and the other, yes, and the other thing is this: the new tools to be able to create plugins. I was able to send that code to every shelter, and they put the plugin right on their website, or they put the plugin on their Facebook page. So we were able to even get further, you know, because we could reach the people who went to the shelter's Facebook page, or they would do emails to their email as well. So there's lots of different ways of working this.
Gotcha. Okay, so time for a couple of questions. I suppose to both of you, Josh and Libby, you know, if you're a one-stop shop or you have limited capacity, and how do you kind of divide your time? I mean, Libby, in your case, you say you have to do membership as well as all the other things before you even start thinking about advocacy. Josh, I think in your case, you might have been doing just advocacy, but that in itself is something that has to get divided up. So maybe, Libby, you could talk to sort of the notion of having to do everything and how much time you've allotted to advocacy, and then, Josh, you can talk about dividing up the advocacy time.
Sure. Well, I basically, the first 6 months of the year is advocacy, because the session starts in January and ends in June. It just ended yesterday. So my focus is on advocacy during the first 6 months of the year, and then I can tell the story of our accomplishments to do membership development, because I'll do a mailing. Everybody who's gotten money, not everybody who's gotten money is a member, but now that they've gotten this money, I'm doing outreach to them and saying, you really should join. We're lobbying on your behalf anyway, and the more shelters we have, the stronger we'll be. So for me, the first half of the year is advocacy. The second half of the year is membership and everything else that has to happen, the conferences and all that sort of stuff that happens. It's the only way I can you know, really split it up. There are times when I do deal with membership issues during the course of the legislative session, and that's fine because they're usually one-offs. But if I'm going to go out and do board development for a shelter, I do that after session's over, because that's one of our member benefits.
In terms of my time and kind of dividing it up, I'm doing advocacy year-round, but really to do it in a one-stop shop sense, it's dividing between, you know, what is cyclical and, like, what are we going to do every year? What are the high-priority projects that, you know, every legislative cycle occur, and then what are some new ideas that we can push our agenda forward. So, you see in some cases organizations will just follow the legislative calendar completely, but we want to get in front of it and do, more outreach also. So, our fly-in, our lobby day, which, Libby, you do as well, cyclical, is something that I know my time has to go to that. That's a high priority item, and that's something that is time consuming. Every new Congress, so every 2 years, we release a state of advocacy survey, which deals a lot with communications preferences and like how our advocates want to get their information. And then, of course, August recess is a time when we release a packet, encourage in-district meetings. So those are 3 examples of something that, a lot of time and energy is going into. And then, like, projects that come about where, your federal lobbyist or your state lobbyist or, looking at the priority scope if you're truly a one-person association, come up and be like, all right, we can interject ourselves into this conversation. So you kind of have to pivot and, figure out what's going on. And, the legislative cycle, it's a moving target. And some things will get added as riders, and, like, you don't know what the legislative vehicle is going to be. And sometimes you'll even see where you support bills and you are initiators of bills, and then, in the long and run of it, when it goes through all of the lobbying on all of the legislative process, you end up opposing your own bill, which can be tough explaining to your membership.
Yeah. I mean, we will start in September with developing our new legislative agenda for the year, for next legislative session, and we'll also start talking with at the Department of Ag and Markets and the 2 sponsors of the fund about any language changes we want to the actual bill language around the fund. So, we do some stuff during the fall as well. It's not like it's just one or the other, but it's all integrated.
For sure. I guess this is kind of a question about relationships, and I'm kind of tapping into what you said, Libby, about the first year you tried to do this, you had the wrong people sponsor the bill, and Josh, you a lot about using external resources if you're a one-stop shop. How do you find the right people? How do you kind of build those resources?
Well, I work very closely with the ASPCA. They're one of our funders, and Bill Ketzer, their Northeast Regional Director, he's the chair of my legislative committee. And so together, along with our respective lobbyists, the 4 of us work on who's going to be the best person for a particular bill. And there are some people in the New York State Legislature who think they've got the corner on all the animal bills. And that's not the case, because we don't want to have only one person carrying these bills. And, the Companion Animal Capital Fund, Deborah Glick and I have known each other for 30 years, and when she came to me and said she wanted to do it, I said, great. And, I was able to follow up, and we made it happen. And so it's just about, knowing who people are and using the relationships that the people you advocate with also have.
Yeah, and the external side, and really it's, cultivating. We talk a lot about the ladders of engagement, kind of testing, making an ask or a request to somebody that's a member or, external stakeholder, and if they perform well on a small task that, requires a little bit of bandwidth, then you kind of go to the next one, and really establishing that trust and the working relationship is critical. When you're dealing with some external stakeholders where you're just getting advice and that, I mean, is a dime a dozen. Like, you can do that many times and find, many different opinions on it. Like, if you have an advocacy conversation about how to do something with the same person year to year, their opinion's going to change because it's constantly in flux. And then you go organization to organization, and even internally there's discrepancies or there's different strategies and techniques that people use. So, again, it comes to that versatility and variety, getting a variety of opinions.
That's kind of all the time we have today. So thanks again to Joshua Habursky and to Libby Post. And please do join us next time for our next advocacy webinar. Keep an eye out for that email, and we will talk to you soon.